Imagine being an examiner. It's 7 o'clock in the evening, you're listening to the 70th piece of the day. You press play on this piece, and it's another one that sounds really similar to the ones you've been listening to all day. This video is all about making sure that your piece is not one of those pieces. There's a lot of info here, so feel free to skip around this video. You'll find timestamps to all the chapters in the description below. Now, use the word mistakes, that's probably too strong a word. It's all about balancing ideas that are adventurous and ideas which keep your piece on track. We've spoken to teachers, examiners, students, listened to lots and lots of students' pieces to analyse what works and what doesn't work, to help you create a piece that really is going to sell to the examiner, or perhaps to any kind of listener. Waffle music. What do I mean? Listen to this. I'm just going to make something up in D minor. Here we go. That's what I mean by waffle music. It's not really developing any ideas. There's nothing wrong with it. Each bar sounds kind of okay. There's no wrong notes. But it's very, very difficult to memorize for the examiner to hear what you've done. If I asked you to sing that tune back, I think you'd probably struggle. I certainly couldn't. So I know there's lots of music. You hear stuff a little bit like this on the telly all the time. I'm just saying it's maybe not a good idea to do for an exam piece. No tension or release. If you listen to the piece that I just played, in the waffle music, every bar was a sort of similar level of tension. I could easily play a chord that wasn't in the key of D minor, for example, A, and it would automatically put some tension in. So like this. Tension, release. I'm not saying that you have to use music which has tension release in that classic release, tension, release. You can also have tension followed by tension, and sometimes that can also be draining after a while. If you've got no release, now, both of these, music which is all tension, music which is all release, there's some brilliant music written that way. I'm not saying it's something you necessarily have to avoid. I'm just saying be careful what you're doing in an exam piece where you're not playing between tension and release.
I think of tension and release is really important, but I don't do it necessarily in a cerebral way. I do it in a very natural way. How does that feel? It's all through the ear. It can often be you get there a little bit slower than if you had the theory and you go, oh, I can get there like that.
Melodies without a phrase structure. This is another big danger, because most melodies do have a phrase structure. There usually is a sort of breath, because writing melody is so related to singing, where you have to breathe. This is the kind of tune that would make an examiner's heart sink. There's no motifs, there's no space. Once again, it's really difficult to memorize that tune. I really don't know how it goes. Yet it didn't really sound bad. It just sounded boring. If I just took the bar of this music, I could make a phrase out of it. Then do the second phrase. And then I repeated that. That would be much more memorable than just making more and more and more notes. Sing out loud, it just naturally makes you sing a phrase which has got breath in it, which has got life in it. You might find that rather than slowly inputting stuff into your computer, just by humming a tune to yourself or into your phone, you get a result.
I really like to try and write tunes where the melody is singable, but also I it's just the best way for me to come up with them, really. Being able to just sing something and then just constantly go round and round singing it and hearing the rest of the instruments in your head and then transferring it to wherever is comfortable to write it, it's the best thing.
Another way of getting there is to play an instrument. And it's amazing what you can do even if you're not a natural musician or don't think that you are. So I asked Olivia, one of my colleagues next door, to just sit, mess around on the piano and just make little bite-sized musical chunks up, just try and make up a tune. And it was pretty incredible. In less than a minute, she made up a tune that sounded like this. You can hear quite naturally that she's done a melody which has got a question and answer structure. I think it's actually a really useful tune, that. Immediately it starts giving me ideas for chords. This is the little arrangement that I made up when I first heard it. Kind of cheesy piano ballad. Kind of jazzy sort of one. And you're going to be hearing this tune a lot because we're going to be using it dozens of times in the course of these 2 videos. One other thing that's quite interesting is that you'll often find that naturally you do an upbeat rather than starting on the first beat of the bar. You start to do these, start a tune before the bar starts or after, and you can see that Olivia has done that. Her tune goes 1, 2, 3, da 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 da. She starts before the first beat of the bar. I did an analysis of songs in the charts a few months ago, and it's 30%. It's actually under 30% of songs start on the first beat of the bar. I have to tell you that that's not the same with, that's not the case with student pieces. A lot of them start on the first beat of the bar because people aren't hearing the tune in their head. Beware of 120 beats per minute. Most sequencers like Logic, Cubase, Ableton, or Finale or Sibelius, the score writing programs, they default to 120 beats per minute, which is a perfectly good tempo, but very few tunes are actually going to want to be at that. If you choose 120 beats per minute, you're kind of advertising to the examiner that you've done the easiest thing. You haven't even bothered to change the tempo. So really make sure your tune wants to be at that speed if you choose that option.
There's always room for compositions changing tempo and becoming something else. And there has been moments where I'll write something that's super fast, 120 BPM, that's not super fast, but it's fast-ish. But it works better at 90 BPM. And I think it's just playing around with that and being open to changing things and things becoming something else.
No intro. Not every song has to have an intro. There's some brilliant songs that don't, like Life on Mars, for example, by David Bowie. But listen what I've done with Olivia's tune here. It's okay, but it's quite a lot to take on. There's a lot of information. To start a piece like that might be too much. Just by introducing the different ideas more gradually, you can start to take them all in. Now, you might have noticed when I played that version that you could suddenly hear this tune, which you couldn't hear the first time round. You weren't aware of it. There was too much information. But it was there. There it is in the first example. But if I play it, you probably can't hear it. Maybe you can hear it, but your ear doesn't sort of go to it. So just that simple thing of doing an intro can clarify in the examiner's mind what your musical ideas are. Okay, this is the longest section. Too many ideas. This is probably the most common mistake that I see in student compositions. Let's use Olivia's example. Here I've used her tune, but I've also got loads of other tunes going at the same time. See what you think of this. really messy and it's a lot of information to take on board. I got this tune. I've got this sort of canon tune. I've got this one. And I've got the bass line. Now, if I just simplified this tune, just thinned out the bottom 2 lines, I would immediately improve this without changing anything else about it. Yeah, I mean, it's still kind of strange, but it's clearing up. I could keep on stripping away. Actually, I think I could go for another layer of stripping away, of simplicity.
Because you can keep adding stuff. What I much rather do is take stuff out. And that, for me, that's where I get really excited. I like also space in music. I think one of the problems with Pro Tools, and again, the way people make music, is you've got endless, unlimited tracks to record on. And I think that's really dangerous, because I think that, you know, it means that you just keep adding your ideas, and there can be too much information. Unless it's really great, get rid of it. Unless it really matters, get rid of it.
The second too many ideas culprit is too many ideas one after the other. There's too many themes. They're coming so thick and fast that the listener can't really even take them on board. So here I've just done something. It's kind of awful with Olivia's tune. So there you go. I can't even remember what Olivia's tune sounds like after hearing that. 6 or 7 completely different ideas, one after the other. You're almost certainly going to get a bad mark with a piece like that.
When I first started composing, I used to write too many ideas down. There's so much you can get from just, I don't know, let's say 3 bars of melody. It's just being kind of clever and creative with that little segment you've come up with.
Sometimes less is more. Even if you've got just a bar of complexity, just keep it at that and develop that idea. And even if you're changing the key or changing who's playing the melody, that's what I've tried to do to make sure that I don't over cram stuff into one piece.
I love economy. I really like doing a lot with very little. It feels good to me to do that.
If you're only going to do something once in a piece of music, make sure you know why. It's probably going to be an intro, an outro, a little bridging section maybe before the chorus or something like that. Having lots and lots of ideas that only happen once is really likely to be a bad idea. Not enough ideas. I actually don't come across this one very often. Often I talk to students and they say, oh, I don't feel like I've got enough ideas. And actually they have, they're just not doing enough with their ideas. But, you know, an example, if I took Olivia's tune and I did a not enough ideas thing, I would just probably play her tune over and over again. Yes, you can have too few ideas, but it's unlikely to happen. Bad bass management. This is so common in student pieces. I'll just play you a thing that I've thrown together, which is kind of deliberately bad on this occasion, with Olivia's tune. Here we go. There's too much stuff going on in the bass. It becomes really confusing. You can hear just by moving the piano up a bit, it starts to clear up. All I've done is put the piano up an octave. Everything else is exactly the same. Now I can start to hear the tune. And another thing I just want to bring to your attention is making the bass elements of your piece work together. So if you've got, say, a kick drum, you might want it to be playing maybe not exactly the same time as the bass line, but at least where the two players, this is all digital, but are kind of listening to each other. When the bass was just doing any old thing, let's just listen to just the drums and bass. They don't sound like they're a team anywhere near as much as they do when I'm doing this. Kick, drum and bass together. Ba, 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 ba. Cutting and pasting. There are a lot of creative things that you can do with this kind of software, with the score writing programs, with the sequencers like Logic and Cubase and Pro Tools and so on. It's a fabulous way of getting a sense of your overall piece and maybe creating new stuff as well. But cutting and pasting can be a real vice, and examiners can hear it and they can see it. If your score is notated, they can see it really, really easily, and it can come across as really lazy. So what do you do? I mean, music inherently involves repetition. What are the solutions? Firstly, just don't do a literal repeat. If you do something like that, how about putting a harmony in? So instead of it going, so I've got that. Even doing that will make a huge difference. You could also decorate just by going, or whatever, some other kind of decoration. That again will show that you've just put in effort. You haven't just moved a piece of music an inch across the screen, which isn't really showing the kind of creativity that an examiner is looking for. Here's another one. You could change the instrument or the register. Here I'm putting it in the left hand of the piano. I could move it down on a couple of octaves. I've got the same material but in a different voice. Of course, you could do the same thing with Logic. If you're moving some material, this is the sequencer that I'm using, Logic. I could just double this melody here. Whoops. Really simple. Oh, missed a couple of notes. I told you it took a bit of effort to do this. So I've just doubled the melody. It's not a literal repeat. I've put some effort into making the piece grow.
Think very much of the copy and paste thing. So, oh, here's an idea. And especially if I'm feeling quite pressured for time, I'm going to take this idea, stick it here, rather than actually taking time to organically develop it. And sometimes you can hear that. You can hear the computerized bit, even if it's live musicians playing it. You can hear the copy and paste. So that can be an issue with technology, for sure.
Writing bar by bar. I'm just going to work on this piece of music here on the screen for a bit. I'm going to work in Logic. So what I'm doing there is just working on one bar, and I'm just trying out stuff, not thinking about what has just come before or where I'm going to go after this bar. You might do it in a sequencer, you might be doing it in a score writing program, but it's deadly. So it's a very, very difficult way of writing music. It can be done, but it's best done by an experienced professional. Otherwise, you know, hard hats on. It's a pretty tricky thing to get right. You're way, way more likely to get an effective sounding piece of music by having a good idea of where you're aiming for and to have a longer idea in your mind's ear to work with. The bass line isn't really a bass line. Okay, I know that sometimes a bass line just goes and it's just playing the root note. Something like Crazy in Love, by the chorus of that by Beyonce, that also is just a 2-note, just follows the chords, bass line. So obviously it can work incredibly well. You could become a millionaire doing that, but you may not get a good mark in an exam. So if I just take Olivia's example once again, I can even see it on the screen there that that's going to be a boring bass line. Here we go. Can you see there, that line going across? Absolutely nothing wrong with that, having that bass line just playing that very, very simple thing. But I would really encourage you to not use that technique more than a few times in a single piece, where it's always playing what we call the root note of the chord. So if I'm in G, I would have the G in the bass just playing maybe once every beat or once every 2 beats. What you're trying to do is things like this, have a bass part which has movement in it. So even just doing this simple thing of having the bass, as we'd say, walking down the scale, something which is approaching a singable line. you're getting more towards the kind of bass line that examiner is going to likely give you a higher mark for. If you're writing the kind of music that has chord sequences, you're likely to make a much better bass line if you're really aware of the chords that you're playing. You'll naturally find notes that fit, and you'll start to do this thing which we call voice leading, where instead of just jumping around to whatever chord you're playing, you start to find ways of making your bass line walk up and down like the one I've just played.
Maybe because I played in bands and I love, bass guitars. I feel the bass line is where we feel things. And I think it's so if I've sketched something, I'll go back and look at that bass line where it's just maybe playing a minim and then another minim, just holding down the bass. I think of other ways for me to make that bass line tell a story. So basically delineate the line, because I think the line is so important in the bass.
But another thing you can do is try and look for a rhythmic pattern, so that the bass line has its own, not just its own contour of pitch, but it has its own kind of sound, its own rhythm. So I've got one which goes boom, 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 boom. Really simple. These are sort of classically sounding things, but you hear beautiful bass lines, and a bass player like Aston Barrett from Bob Marley's group, the Wailers. If you listen to some of his bass lines, incredibly catchy tunes. They seem to be almost as important as the vocal line sometimes.
Another great one is TLC Waterfalls. And the bass player on that is a guy called Mark Lamarcky Jefferson. That bass line is so strange. That, in fact, the whole feeling of that song, the oddness of that song, the bass line is dum dum ba dum 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 ba dum 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 ba dum 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 ba dum 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 do 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 ba do do ba dum dum. It's like a whole little adventure on its own,
Another amazing place to find really inventive bass lines that are actually driving the track is in hip hop, and there's thousands of examples. We'll put some in the description below, but Hell of a Life by Kanye would be a good place to start. But once you start hearing them, you kind of can't stop hearing them. So there you go, that's part 1 of this video. Check out the second part on our channel.